Adrian Cole sat in his office, looking at the wide glass wall that gave him a view of the entire city. Tall buildings touched the sky, cars moved like tiny dots below, and the city lights blinked as if they were alive. To everyone outside, Adrian was the image of success. At just 35 years old, he was already the CEO of a rising tech company. He had given big speeches at conferences, appeared in magazines, and earned the respect of people in the business world. But when the office doors closed, when the crowd stopped clapping, and when the long meetings ended, Adrian was just a man with tired eyes. He was a single father trying to raise his little girl, Emily. His wife, Anna, had passed away 5 years ago. Adrian never liked to talk about it. The memory was too heavy, and he had learned to hide his pain behind work. People said time healed everything, but for him, the wound never really closed. It only became quieter, tucked away behind his busy days. Emily was his light. She was only 7, with bright brown eyes and a smile that could melt even the hardest of hearts. Every morning she would run into his arms, asking him to braid her hair, something Adrian never quite mastered but always tried anyway. At night, when he came home late, she would leave little drawings on his desk. Some showed her holding his hand, some had the 3 of them together, her, Adrian, and the mother she could only remember faintly. Balancing work and fatherhood was not easy. Adrian often felt he was failing at both. He missed school plays, forgot to sign permission slips, and sometimes brought home the stress of the boardroom. Yet, no matter how hard the day was, Emily's laughter always pulled him back. She was the reason he kept going. Lately, though, things had become more difficult. His company was working on its most ambitious project yet, a smart home system that was supposed to change lives. The idea was to create a device that could understand families, adjust to their routines, and make daily living smoother. Investors had poured millions into it, and the entire industry was watching. But there was one problem. The system kept failing. 15 of his best engineers had worked on it for months. They tried every fix, ran every test, and built countless versions. But the glitch never went away. Sometimes the system would freeze, sometimes it would crash, and sometimes it would simply stop working without explanation. Each time, the engineers promised they were close. Each time, they failed. Adrian felt the pressure building. Investors wanted answers, the board wanted progress, and the media was waiting for news. The company's future depended on this project. And yet, every day ended with the same result: failure. That evening, after another long meeting filled with frustration, Adrian drove home in silence. The city lights blurred as he thought of what to say to the board tomorrow. His tie was loose, his head ached, and his heart felt heavy. But as soon as he opened the front door, he heard Emily's voice. "Daddy!" she shouted, running into his arms. The weight on his shoulders lessened. He hugged her tightly, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair. For a moment, nothing else mattered. "Were you working late again?" Emily asked, tilting her head. "Yes, sweetheart," Adrian said with a tired smile. "But I'm here now." In the living room, Clara, the nanny, smiled warmly. She had only been with them for a few weeks, but already she had brought comfort into the house. She was kind, calm, and patient. Emily adored her, and Adrian was grateful, even if he didn't always show it. Clara had prepared dinner, and soon the 3 of them sat around the table. Emily told a long story about her school day, using big hand gestures that made both adults laugh. Adrian watched her, and for a short while, he forgot about failing systems and angry investors. Yet, once Emily was asleep, the worries returned. Adrian sat in his study, staring at the prototype of the smart home system on his desk. The screen glowed faintly, mocking him with its frozen display. He sighed deeply, rubbing his temples. 15 engineers, he muttered to himself. 15, and not one answer. He thought about his journey, the endless hours, the sacrifices, the nights when he missed putting Emily to bed. All of it was supposed to lead to success, to a better future. But now, it felt like everything was slipping away. Outside the study, Clara quietly picked up the empty teacup he had left behind. She glanced at the glowing device, curious but silent. She wasn't an engineer, and she knew nothing about codes or circuits. Still, she noticed the sadness in Adrian's eyes and the way his shoulders sagged. It was the look of a man who carried too much alone. Back in the study, Adrian leaned back in his chair. He thought of Anna and the promises he had made to protect Emily, to build a future she could be proud of. He thought of the company and all the people who depended on it, and he thought of himself, a man trying to be both father and leader, feeling like he was failing at both. The city outside glittered, but inside the room, Adrian sat in quiet darkness. He didn't know that soon. Help would come from the most unexpected person. For now, he was just a single dad, a tired CEO, and a man holding on to hope in a world that kept testing him. The next morning began like many others in the Cole household. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, painting soft golden patterns on the kitchen floor. Emily sat at the table swinging her legs while eating cereal, her laughter filling the room as Clara gently braided her hair. Adrian entered with his suit jacket half on, one hand holding his phone and the other adjusting his tie. His face was calm, but his mind was already racing through the endless list of problems waiting. At the office. "Good morning, Daddy," Emily chirped. "Good morning, sweetheart," Adrian replied, forcing a smile as he kissed her forehead. Clara, standing nearby, noticed the tiredness behind his smile. "Long night again?" she asked softly. Adrian gave a small nod. "The project isn't working. The engineers tried another round of tests yesterday, but—" He let the sentence trail off. His voice carried the weight of disappointment. Clara didn't ask further. She wasn't part of his world of machines and codes, but she understood one thing. Adrian was stretched thin. He was trying to be everything at once: father, leader, problem solver. And yet, she could see the cracks forming. After breakfast, Adrian rushed out the door, heading straight into another day of meetings and stress. Clara stayed behind with Emily, helping her with a science project for school. Emily wanted to build a small solar system model, and Clara patiently guided her as they painted planets and tied them to strings. The house was filled with gentle laughter, a comfort Adrian often missed when he was away. At the office, things were no better. The engineers crowded around the long conference table, their laptops open, faces drawn with frustration. "We tried rerouting the code again," one said. "And?" Adrian asked, though he already guessed the answer. "It froze within 5 minutes," another admitted. Silence fell over the room. Adrian leaned back in his chair, pressing his fingers against his temple. It was the same story every day. Every possible adjustment had been tested. Every brilliant mind on his team had tried and failed. The system simply refused to cooperate. As the meeting dragged on, investors sent sharp emails demanding progress. One even threatened to pull out if results weren't shown soon. Adrian's chest tightened. His company had been built from the ground up with countless sacrifices, and now it stood at risk of collapse. That evening, when he finally returned home, Emily was waiting at the door with her solar system project in hand. "Daddy, look! We made Saturn with real rings!" she said proudly. Adrian bent down, admiring her work. "It's beautiful," he said, truly meaning it. For a brief moment, he forgot about failing systems and angry investors. At dinner, Emily chattered happily, explaining how she and Clara had worked on the planets. Adrian smiled, listening quietly. Clara noticed the way his eyes softened when Emily spoke. but also the shadow that returned when the table fell silent. Later, after Emily was tucked into bed, Adrian sat in the living room with the prototype, device resting on his lap. Its screen glowed faintly, a reminder of failure. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Clara walked in quietly, carrying a tray with a cup of tea. "You should rest," she said gently. "I can't," Adrian replied. "This project, it's too important. If we don't fix it soon, the whole company could fall apart." Clara placed the tea beside him and sat on the armchair across from him. "You carry a lot," she said softly. Adrian gave a small, tired laugh. "Sometimes it feels like too much. I'm supposed to be a leader at work and a father at home, but most days I feel like I'm failing at both." "You're not failing," Clara said firmly. "Emily adores you. She talks about you all the time. She knows you love her. That's what matters most." Her words sank into him, offering comfort he didn't expect. For a moment, Adrian looked at Clara properly, not just as the nanny, but as someone who had become a quiet anchor in their lives. She didn't try to solve his problems. She simply listened, and somehow, that was enough. As their conversation drifted, Clara's eyes wandered to the device on his lap. She didn't understand its technology, but she noticed the way the screen froze after a few commands. Something about the pattern caught her attention, though she didn't say anything yet. "Does it always stop like that?" she asked casually. Adrian raised a brow. "Yes, every single time. It's like there's a wall we can't get past. 15 engineers have tried to figure it out." Clara nodded thoughtfully but stayed quiet. She wasn't an expert, and she didn't want to sound foolish. But a part of her couldn't shake the feeling that maybe the answer wasn't as complicated as everyone believed. That night, long after Adrian went to bed, Clara walked past the study and saw the prototype still glowing on the desk. She paused, staring at it. Her mind turned back to Emily's project earlier that day, when she had noticed a simple mistake in the order of the planets. They had almost placed Jupiter before Mars, but she caught it in time. A small order mistake had nearly changed the whole system. She wondered if Adrian's project was suffering from something similar, a small detail hidden in plain sight. But she shook her head and smiled to herself. "I'm just a nanny," she whispered. "What do I know about technology?" Still, the thought lingered. In the days that followed, Adrian grew more stressed. The board called him into urgent meetings, emails piled up, and deadlines loomed dangerously close. Every time he came home, Clara could see the exhaustion in his posture, the weariness in his eyes, and every time she found small ways to ease his burden, warm meals, gentle encouragement, laughter with Emily. She didn't know it yet, but her quiet presence was preparing the ground for something extraordinary, because soon, when everyone else had failed, Clara would be the one to see what no one else had. The week dragged on heavily for Adrian. Each day at the office began with a hopeful spark and ended in disappointment. The engineers worked late into the night, their desks piled high with empty coffee cups and scattered notes. Yet, despite all their intelligence, despite all their effort, the system still failed. The problem was always the same. The prototype would start smoothly, running as if it finally understood its purpose. Lights blinked, screens loaded, and for a few minutes, everything looked perfect. But then, just when Adrian thought they were close, the system would freeze, or shut down entirely. No warning, no explanation, only silence and a blank screen. The board's patience was wearing thin. At the latest meeting, one investor leaned forward with sharp eyes. "Mr. Cole, we've trusted you with millions. If you can't deliver, we may need to cut our losses." Adrian clenched his jaw, keeping his composure. "We will fix it," he said firmly, though inside he wasn't sure anymore. After the meeting, he sat in his office, staring at the city skyline. The weight of responsibility pressed on him like a mountain. It wasn't just about money or reputation. Hundreds of employees depended on the company. And beyond all that, he had promised Emily a better future. If he failed here, he feared he would fail her too. That evening, Adrian returned home later than usual. Emily was already in her pajamas, sitting on the living room rug with Clara. They were building a tower out of wooden blocks, Emily laughing each time it wobbled dangerously. "Daddy!" Emily shouted, jumping up to hug him. Adrian smiled faintly, his tiredness melting for a moment. "What are you two up to?" "Building. The tallest tower in the world," Emily said proudly. Clara looked up, her eyes warm. "We're seeing how high we can go before it falls." Adrian chuckled softly and joined them on the floor for a few minutes. He added a block carefully and the tower grew taller, but soon it tipped and collapsed, pieces scattering across the rug. Emily clapped her hands in delight, while Adrian sighed dramatically. "I guess I'm not very good at this," he said with a small smile. "Sometimes it's just the order, Daddy," Emily replied wisely. "If you put the blocks in the wrong place, it falls." Her simple words lingered in Adrian's mind longer than he expected. Order, placement, small mistakes making everything crumble. Later that night, while Emily slept, Adrian sat again in his study with the prototype glowing in front of him. He pressed commands, watched it start, and then, like always, it froze. He rubbed his forehead, frustration boiling inside. Clara walked in quietly, holding a book she had been reading. She paused when she saw him still working. "You haven't slept yet?" she asked softly. "I can't," Adrian admitted. "If I stop, I'll lose more time." Clara sat on the chair across from him, her eyes drifting to the device. "It always stops there?" she asked gently. Adrian nodded. "Every time. No one can figure out why." Clara hesitated. She wasn't trained in technology, and she didn't want to sound foolish. But she had noticed something. Each time the screen froze, it happened after the same sequence of commands. To her, it looked like the system was trying to do too many things at once. "Maybe," she began carefully, "maybe it's not broken. Maybe it's just confused, like when Emily tries to do her homework, eat her snack, and watch cartoons all at the same time. She gets stuck." Adrian blinked, surprised. No engineer had ever described the problem that way. He gave a small laugh. "Confused? Machines don't get confused." But Clara shrugged gently. "Maybe it's simpler than everyone thinks. Maybe it just needs the right order." Her words echoed Emily's advice earlier with the blocks. Adrian looked down at the frozen screen. Could it really be something that simple? The next morning, Adrian took the prototype to the office and mentioned Clara's comment in passing. The engineer smiled politely but dismissed it quickly. "That's not how systems work," one said. Still, the thought stayed with him. That evening, as usual, he brought the prototype home, setting it on the counter while he cooked pasta with Clara's help. Emily sat nearby, drawing planets again for her school project. At one point, the device beeped, signaling another crash. Adrian sighed, ready to push it aside. But Clara leaned over casually. "May I?" she asked. Adrian hesitated, then handed it to her. "Go ahead. It won't make a difference." Clara studied the screen, her brow furrowed. She tapped gently, not rushing, as if she were organizing a recipe or arranging Emily's toys. She pressed a few keys, adjusted the order of commands, and waited. To Adrian's shock, the screen didn't freeze. The system ran smoothly, flowing from one function to the next without error. Lights blinked in perfect sequence. Commands followed. Naturally, and for the first time, the prototype worked exactly as it was supposed to. Adrian's eyes widened. What did you just do?" Clara looked at him, almost embarrassed. "I just rearranged the steps. It felt like they were out of order." Adrian stared at the glowing screen. 15 engineers, months of effort, endless meetings, and... Yet Clara had solved it in less than a minute. Emily clapped her hands in delight. "Miss Clara fixed Daddy's big problem," she cheered. Adrian laughed in disbelief, running a hand through his hair. He didn't know whether to feel relief, amazement, or complete shock. All he knew was that something extraordinary had just happened. And he also knew one thing for certain. Life in his home had just changed forever. Adrian couldn't take his eyes off the glowing device. For weeks, it had been nothing but trouble. 15 engineers had tried everything, rewriting codes, running endless simulations, replacing hardware. But the result had always been the same: failure. Yet here it was now, working perfectly in Clara's hands. He blinked as though he were dreaming. "Clara, how did you do that?" Clara looked down at the screen, almost shy. "I just thought..." The steps seemed out of order. Like when Emily and I bake cookies, if you add the flour too soon, it makes a mess. But if you follow the right steps, everything comes together. Adrian stared at her, stunned. That's all you did?" She nodded gently. "I rearranged the commands so they didn't trip over each other. It took only a few seconds." Emily bounced in her seat, grinning from ear to ear. "See, Daddy? I told you Miss Clara is super smart." Adrian laughed in disbelief, rubbing the back of his neck. Apparently smarter than 15 engineers combined. The prototype beeped softly, moving smoothly through its functions. Lights blinked, in perfect rhythm. The voice assistant responded without delay, and the system didn't freeze even once. It was working exactly as it should. Adrian leaned back in his chair, a wave of emotions rushing through him: relief, amazement, and a little bit of pride that he had hired Clara in the first place. "You don't realize what you've done," he said finally. Clara tilted her head. "I only pressed a few keys. Anyone could have done it." "No," Adrian said firmly, his voice carrying both respect and wonder. "No one else saw it. Not even my top engineers. Clara, you solved in 30 seconds what months of effort couldn't." Clara blushed, brushing off the praise. "I wasn't trying to fix anything. I just noticed." Adrian smiled at her. Modesty. She didn't even realize the scale of her discovery. To her, it was a small act of curiosity. To him, it was the lifeline his company desperately needed. The rest of the evening felt lighter. Emily kept clapping her hands, repeating proudly, "Miss Clara fixed it! Miss Clara fixed it!" until Clara gently told her it was bedtime. Adrian tucked Emily in, but his mind kept circling back to the moment Clara touched the device. After Emily was asleep, Adrian returned to the study where Clara was cleaning up the desk. The prototype rested there, still working flawlessly. "Clara," he said quietly, "do you understand what this means?" She looked up, unsure. "That your project works now?" Adrian chuckled softly. "It means more than that. It means the company can move forward. The investors will stay. The jobs of hundreds of people are safe. This could change everything." Clara's eyes softened. "That's good, then. I'm glad." "You don't understand," Adrian continued, his voice more intense. "You've given me back hope. For weeks I thought we were at the edge of failure, and now because of you, we're not." Clara lowered her gaze, unused to such heavy gratitude. She wasn't the type who liked the spotlight. She was just a caretaker, someone who spent her days helping a child with homework and keeping a home warm. But somehow, her simple perspective had solved a problem that the brightest minds couldn't. Adrian studied her for a long moment. He noticed how calm she looked, how grounded she was compared to the whirlwind of pressure that filled his office. She had walked into his life quietly, and yet here she was, changing it in ways he never expected. "Thank you," he said finally, his voice quiet but heartfelt. "Not just for this, but for being here, for Emily, and for me." Clara gave a small smile. "It's what I'm here for." The next morning, Adrian brought the working prototype back to the office. His engineers were stunned when they saw it running smoothly. How is it working? One asked in disbelief. Adrian hesitated for a moment. Should he tell them the truth? That the nanny he hired to look after his daughter had solved what they couldn't? Part of him worried about how they would react, whether they would laugh or feel insulted. But another part of him felt strongly that Clara deserved recognition. Now, he simply said, the problem was order. Someone noticed it. The engineers exchanged confused looks, but they couldn't argue with the results. The system was flawless. For the first time in months, the room buzzed with excitement instead of frustration. By the end of the day, Adrian had already received messages from the board. Investors were thrilled with the progress, and meetings were scheduled to discuss the official launch. The company's future was safe again, but as Adrian drove home that evening, one thought stayed with him. Clara had seen what no one else could. She hadn't been trained, she hadn't studied code, and yet she had understood the problem better than any expert. How was that possible? When he walked through the front door, Emily ran up to him again. "Daddy, did you tell them Miss Clara fixed it?" Adrian chuckled, lifting her into his arms. "Not yet, sweetheart." Clara appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. "I didn't fix anything," she said quickly, though her cheeks turned pink. Adrian smiled at her, his eyes warm with both gratitude and curiosity. "You did more than you realize, Clara, and I intend to make sure everyone knows it." For the first time in weeks, Adrian felt a genuine sense of peace. The storm hanging over him had lifted, his company was safe, his daughter was happy, and his home, thanks to Clara, felt whole again. Little did Clara know, solving the glitch in 30 seconds was only the beginning. Adrian sat at his office desk the following morning, the city skyline stretching before him. Normally, this view gave him strength. It reminded him of how far he had come, from a young engineer with nothing but ideas to the CEO of a company people admired. But today his thoughts were not on the city. They were on Clara. The prototype now worked perfectly. Investors were excited again. Emails poured in with praise, and his team felt a new energy. But behind all this success was a truth only Adrian knew. Clara, the nanny, had solved it. Not the engineers, not the board, not himself. Clara. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. How could he explain that to the board? If he stood in front of them and admitted that the solution came from someone with no formal training, would they respect it? Or would they laugh at the idea, dismissing her as someone who got lucky? He thought about his engineers, too. They had worked day and night, pouring their skills into this project. What would they feel if they discovered the answer had come from someone outside their world? Would they feel insulted? Would they lose faith in him as their leader? The dilemma weighed heavily on him. On one side was honesty, giving Clara the credit she deserved. On the other was protection, keeping her out of a spotlight she never asked for and shielding his company from unnecessary questions. That evening, back at home, Emily was busy drawing again. This time, she sketched her father standing proudly on a stage, holding hands with her and Clara. When she showed the drawing to Adrian, his chest tightened. Even in her childlike way, Emily saw Clara as part of their family. "Daddy," Emily said, "are you going to tell your office that Miss Clara fixed everything?" Adrian hesitated. "Do you think I should?" "Yes," Emily said without a pause. "She's the hero." Clara, standing nearby, shook her head quickly. "Emily, I'm not a hero. Your dad and his team did all the hard work. I only pressed a few buttons." But Adrian's eyes lingered on her. He could see the humility in her words. Clara truly didn't care about recognition. She didn't want fame, money, or attention. She only wanted to care for Emily and help where she could. Later that night, After Emily had gone to bed, Adrian found Clara in the kitchen putting dishes away. He leaned against the counter, watching her quietly for a moment. "Clara," he said softly, "what if I told the board it was you who solved it?" Her eyes widened in surprise. "Adrian, no, that's not necessary. I don't belong in those meetings. I'm not part of that world." "But you are the reason we succeeded," Adrian insisted. "It would be wrong to let others take the credit." Clara shook her head gently. "Sometimes it's not about who gets credit. Sometimes it's about letting things work out the way they should. Your team built everything. I only helped in a tiny way." Her calmness amazed him. Most people would have wanted recognition, but Clara didn't. She cared more about peace than pride. Still, Adrian couldn't shake the feeling. The truth mattered to him. Clara deserved respect for what she had done, but he also respected her. Wish for simplicity. How could he honor her without forcing her into a spotlight she didn't want? The next day, Adrian entered the boardroom for one of the most important meetings of his career. The long table was filled with investors and senior staff, their eyes fixed on him. The prototype was placed at the center of the table, glowing steadily as if proud of itself. "Ladies and gentlemen," Adrian began, his voice steady, "I am pleased to report that our system is now fully operational." Applause broke out. Smiles filled the room. The tension that had hung over the company for weeks dissolved instantly. One investor leaned forward eagerly. "Incredible, Adrian. What finally solved it?" Adrian paused. The room fell silent, waiting for his answer. In his mind, he saw Clara's face, her calm eyes, her gentle smile, her words about order. He remembered Emily's drawing of the three of them together. He took a breath. The truth is, the solution came from an unexpected place. A murmur spread across the table. Adrian continued, choosing his words carefully. "Someone noticed that our system wasn't broken. It was simply out of order. By rearranging the steps, everything began to work." "Who noticed it?" a board member asked. Adrian hesitated again, then answered with quiet honesty. "It wasn't one of our engineers. It was someone outside the project. Someone with fresh eyes." The board members exchanged curious glances. Some raised their brows, clearly surprised. But Adrian stood tall, not backing down. "It taught me something important, that sometimes solutions don't always come from experts. Sometimes they come from people who see the world differently." There was silence for a moment. Then one of the senior investors slowly nodded. "Whoever it was, they saved us." The others agreed, letting the matter rest there. No one laughed, no one mocked. Instead, they respected the result. When Adrian returned home that evening, Emily ran up to him eagerly. "Did you tell them?" she asked. "I told them the truth," Adrian said with a smile. "I told them the answer came from someone special." Clara looked at him across the room, her eyes searching his. She didn't need details to know what he meant. And in that quiet exchange, Adrian felt a deep sense of peace. For the first time in weeks, he slept that night without worry. The company was safe. The truth had been spoken, and Clara remained the steady presence by his side. But deep in his heart, Adrian knew this was just the beginning of a bigger story. The following week was brighter than any Adrian had known in months. The prototype no longer caused panic. Instead, it became the pride of the company. Engineers worked with new energy, investors sent encouraging messages, and the office buzzed with hope. For the first time in a long while, Adrian felt he could breathe. Yet behind all the smiles and congratulations, one truth never left his mind. Clara had been the reason everything turned around. At home, life carried on in its quiet, steady rhythm. Emily was preparing for her school's art fair, and Clara spent hours helping her paint colorful posters. Their laughter often spilled down the hallway, reaching Adrian's study. He found himself pausing at his desk, just listening, letting the sound ease his tired heart. One evening, after another successful day at the office, Adrian came home with a bouquet of flowers. Emily was thrilled, thinking they were for her, but Adrian handed them to Clara instead. "For me?" Clara asked, surprised. "Yes," Adrian said simply. "For everything you've done, not just for Emily, but for me, and for the company." Clara blushed and looked down, holding the flowers close. "You didn't have to, Adrian." "I did," he said softly, "because I don't think you realize how much you've changed things." Her eyes lifted, meeting his, but she said nothing. Still, the warmth in her gaze said more than words could. At work, the board continued to press for details about the solution. Adrian didn't mention Clara's name directly, respecting her wish for privacy, but he made sure to highlight the lesson she had taught him, that sometimes the greatest insights come from those outside the circle of experts. His honesty made the board members thoughtful. Some even admitted they had underestimated the power of fresh eyes. One afternoon, while Emily was at a friend's house, Adrian found himself sitting with Clara on the porch. The evening sky was painted in orange and pink, and a cool breeze carried the faint scent of blooming flowers. "You really don't want recognition, do you?" Adrian asked gently. Clara smiled softly. "I don't need it. Recognition is not what makes life meaningful. It's the small things, helping Emily with her homework, keeping the house warm, seeing you smile when you come home after a long day. That's enough for me." Her words touched him deeply. He had spent so many years chasing recognition, building his name, proving his worth. Yet here was Clara, content with simplicity, and somehow her quiet strength outshone the loud applause he often received. Adrian realized then how much he had come to rely on her presence. It wasn't just about Emily's care or the 30-second solution. Clara had become part of the rhythm of their home. She had filled spaces that once felt empty, brought peace where there had been pressure, and laughter where there had been silence. At the office, Adrian began sharing this story in his own way. In a company-wide meeting, he stood before his employees. "We've been reminded of something important," he said. "Sometimes solutions don't come from where we expect. They come from new perspectives, from people who see things differently. Let this remind us to listen more, to value every voice, no matter their background." His words sparked a new culture in the company. Employees felt encouraged to share ideas freely, even if they weren't part of the technical team. The atmosphere shifted, less about rank and more about collaboration. Without naming her, Clara's influence had already reshaped the way the company worked. At home, Emily sensed the change in her father, too. He smiled more often, laughed more easily, and seemed lighter, as though a heavy weight had been lifted. One night, as he tucked her into bed, Emily whispered, "Daddy, you're happy again." Adrian kissed her forehead gently. "Yes, sweetheart. I think I am." Still, in the quiet moments, Adrian's thoughts always returned to Clara. He found himself watching her as she read stories to Emily, as she carefully arranged flowers in a vase, as she laughed softly at Emily's jokes. He noticed the kindness in her eyes, the steadiness in her voice, the way she seemed to bring peace simply by being there. One evening, after Emily had gone to bed, Adrian found Clara in the kitchen preparing tea. He leaned against the counter, watching her quietly. "You know," he said softly, "you've done more than save a project. You've changed my life." Clara looked at him, startled. "Adrian," she began, but he stopped her gently. "I mean it," he said firmly. "I was drowning in pressure, in fear of failure. You reminded me of what really matters. You gave me perspective, and you gave Emily a warmth I could never replace. Clara lowered her gaze, her cheeks turning pink. I didn't do anything special. You did, Adrian insisted. More than you know. For a long moment, the kitchen was silent, filled, only with the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint clink of a spoon against porcelain. Adrian wanted to say more, to tell her exactly how much she meant to him. But the words stayed in his heart. It wasn't time. Not yet. Instead, he smiled gently. Thank you, Clara. Truly. Clara met his eyes and returned the smile, quiet and tender. As the days passed, the company thrived. The system was ready for its grand launch. Investors were pleased, and the media began to buzz about Adrian's remarkable turnaround. But in his heart, Adrian knew the true story wasn't about technology or business. It was about a nanny who had walked into his home and, without trying, reminded him of hope. And he was beginning to realize that what she had given him was far greater than any invention ever could be. The morning sunlight spilled into the Cole household, casting a warm glow across the living room. Birds chirped outside, and the faint smell of freshly baked bread drifted from the kitchen. Emily ran around, holding a stack of her colorful drawings, excited to show them to Adrian and Clara. Adrian watched her, smiling, his heart full. The weeks since the prototype's success had changed everything. The company was thriving, the system worked perfectly, and his life at home felt lighter, more peaceful. But there was one truth that he could no longer ignore. Clara was no longer just an employee. She had become a part of their lives in a way that mattered deeply. Emily ran up to him, waving her drawings. "Daddy, look! These are all about us!" Adrian knelt down, taking the papers gently. Each drawing showed Emily, him, and Clara together. In one, they were holding hands in a park. In another, they were baking cookies in the kitchen. The joy in the pictures was obvious, but so was the love and warmth that Emily felt for Clara. "She's amazing, isn't she?" Emily said, her eyes shining. Adrian smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Yes, sweetheart, she really is." Clara, standing quietly nearby, smiled softly at Emily's praise. "I just help where I can," she said modestly. Adrian shook his head. "You do much more than that. You've brought so much into our lives. Emily and we're lucky to have you." Clara's cheeks flushed, and she looked down. "I don't do it for thanks, Adrian. I do it because I care about you both." Her words hit him deeply. He had been so focused on gratitude and recognition that he almost forgot the most important thing: Clara's heart. She wasn't seeking praise or reward. She only wanted to be part of their lives in her gentle, quiet way. That evening, Adrian found himself pacing the study, thinking about the future. He knew that he wanted Clara to be more than just a nanny. She had become family, and he could no longer imagine life without her presence. But he also knew he needed to approach the matter carefully. Clara valued simplicity, and he didn't want to pressure her. When Clara came to check on Emily, Adrian took a deep breath and asked her to sit with him. They sat across from each other, the prototype device on the desk quietly humming in the background. "Clara," he began, "I've been thinking. You're more than just a helper in our home. You become part of our family." Clara blinked, a little surprised. "Adrian, I know you don't want recognition or responsibility beyond what you already do," he continued gently. "But I want you to know how much you mean to us. Not just Emily, but me too. You've changed our lives in ways I can't even fully explain." Clara lowered her gaze, her voice soft. "I just want to be here, to help. That's enough for me." Adrian reached across the desk, taking her hand in his. "I understand that. I don't want to take anything from you, but I also want to offer something: our home, our family, and our trust. I want you to know that you're always welcome here, not as an employee, but as part of us." For a long moment, Clara looked at him, her eyes searching his. She could see the sincerity in his expression, the depth of feeling he didn't always express. She realized then that the bond between them went beyond duty or gratitude. It was about trust, respect, and shared care for Emily. I'm grateful, Adrian, she said finally, her voice steady but filled with warmth. And I feel the same way. I want to be part of your family, but I also want to continue doing what I love, being here for Emily and helping where I can. Adrian smiled, relief washing over him. That's all I could ever ask for. From that day on, the dynamic in the household shifted subtly. Clara was no longer just a nanny. She was part of the family. Adrian treated her with a new warmth. Emily adored her even more, and their home became a place filled with laughter, creativity, and quiet joy. At the office, Adrian's leadership had changed too. He often shared stories of the value of fresh perspectives, teamwork, and noticing small details that could make a big difference. His employees felt inspired by his openness and humility. They respected him not just as a CEO, but as someone who valued people above all. One Saturday, the three of them went to the park together. Emily ran ahead, her laughter echoing as she chased butterflies. Adrian and Clara walked slowly behind, her talking quietly. For the first time in years, Adrian felt completely at peace. You know, he said softly, this life we have now, it's better than I imagined. Clara smiled, watching Emily play. It is, she agreed, and it's even better because we're all in it together. Adrian nodded, feeling a warmth in his heart he hadn't felt in a long time. He realized that success wasn't only about achievements or inventions. Success was about the people you loved, the trust you shared, and the happiness you created together. Later, as they returned home, Emily fell asleep on the couch with her drawings beside her. Adrian and Clara sat quietly nearby, sipping tea and sharing a comfortable silence. The glow of the lamp reflected in their eyes, soft and gentle, mirroring the life they had built together. Adrian looked at Clara, his voice quiet but filled with certainty. Thank you for everything. For Emily. For the company. For me. Clara reached over and touched his hand gently. I told you before, I just want to help. But I'm glad we're here together. Adrian smiled, feeling the weight of the past months lift completely. They had faced stress, fear, and uncertainty. But in the end, love, trust, and small acts of kindness had brought them through. And as he watched Emily sleeping peacefully, he knew that their family, unusual, unexpected, and perfectly imperfect, was exactly where it was meant to be.